please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Hello and welcome to the Global Natural Resources Conclave 2018. Today we look back on the first edition of GNRC held last year and also look forward on what to expect this year as we run up to the conclave. In this episode, we take an outside-in perspective on what can India learn from global best practices in this field. Up for review, we look at the social contract of the sector and its implication on last-mile connectivity. And of course, joining us in the studio to share with us their perspective on these issues are our partners for the summit. Let me quickly introduce all of them to you. Dr. Arunabh Ghosh, CEO CEEW, is our first panelist. Also joining us is S. Vijay Kumar, Distinguished Fellow at TERI. And we also have with us Sunil Duggal, Co-Chair of the CII Mining Committee. And for the government perspective, Saurabh Chandra, former Petroleum Secretary. And Abhijit Kulkarni, Partner at McKinsey India. And of course, we also have with us from Geneva, Roberto Boca, Head of Energy and Basic Industries and member of the Executive Committee at the World Economic Forum. Thank you all for joining us at this forum today. So let me kick things off by asking you a question on the fact that the Prime Minister during his Rising India presentation talked about making a paradigm shift from silos to solutions. So I guess I want to ask a simple question to all of you, which is it time that India has an integrated approach to natural resources development? Abhijit, you have a point of view on this.
I think I'm fully in agreement with the silos to solutions. I think that one of the biggest things we see is silos between ministries, but also silos between the state and the center, which creates a lot of dichotomy. Okay. Time has come to really integrate things together, look at it in one perspective, and accelerate our growth.
All right, let's get the counterpoint. It's easy to say that everyone should work together and then we have a singular approach. But it's easier to say than to do. Mr. Jayakumar, you have a...
Yeah, well, I think coordinated rather than integrated is the better way of looking at it, particularly because the different elements of the sector are often a little different in the way they work. You know, the petroleum natural gas sector is different, the coal sector is different, the metallic minerals sector is different, and one can't apply the same rules or the same framework to all of them without understanding the way the sector is constituted. That said, I do fully agree that there is need for integration between the way the states and the central government work, and it's very essential that the central government data and the state government regulatory and enforcement mechanisms work together in order to ensure that whatever is done to extract and exploit natural resources is done efficiently and economically, and with a view to actually, as it were, fire the engine of growth of the country.
Okay, Mr. Duggal, you have anything to add to that?
So, I think it is very important to have a unified approach. You may not be able to integrate, but I think there should be some thought, and there was some discussion which have also gone in the past, that whether there is a opportunity of creating a natural resource ministry, wherein all other elements could also be absorbed in that. But I think I have two things to say. Even if, let us suppose, oil and gas and mining cannot be clubbed together as a natural resource, but some analogy can be drawn. So, like the recent the regulation which has come in oil and gas, that you select the block, and on that block you explore, you extract, and you pay the revenue sharing model with the government. Whether the same approach can be there in the mining. The mining, what we are doing is that we are using the data, which is a minuscule data on which the people are not excited about going for the auction, and the success is not coming. But I would also like to give you the example that, let's suppose there are few blocks which were allotted a couple of years back, and they were supposed to come start mining by this time. At that time we were aware that those blocks are situated in the forest, they are the wildlife areas. So after that, after these blocks were allotted, and still they are struggling with various ministries to get the permission, and the permissions have not come, and God knows when these mining blocks will come into operation.
All right, from domestic anecdotes, let's go to some global reference point. Roberto, what can India learn from the growth stories of other natural resource countries? What do you think are the key takeaway points which can work for India?
Well, certainly, as has been hinted, a systemic approach is recommended, because especially in a fast evolving world as is this one with the digitalization and new technology coming on board, it's very important to have a systemic approach. And on those lines, it's really important to think how the skills of people and the competencies are evolving and will need to evolve. So a systemic approach is important. In terms of example of other countries or other regions in the world, I think the Nordic countries in Europe have been the role model, especially in energy, to how to develop system and really having a destination or a direction of where they want to go, so to allow investment coming in and you know, the sector developing. So systemic approach and clarity on the direction and the objectives, as has been mentioned in the past.
All right, let me follow up with another question to you. Now, the WEF recently launched the Global Energy Transition Index. Now, that introduces a systemic perspective to energy transition readiness and measuring it. Now, India, as I see it, ranks 78th on this index. So, how do you rate this score?
So, we are two dimensions, talking about the objectives. First of all, we are considering countries, how they perform in their energy system around three dimensions. One is sustainability, one is affordability of the energy, and the third one is energy security and access. So we are measuring how countries are performing on these three dimensions. But then when we look at the preparedness, we look at the future. And so we are not only looking at the picture of today, but we are looking how countries are ready for the future. And in those dimensions, we look at how the infrastructure is ready, how the regulations are in place to enable investment, how the human capital is evolving. So very much at these two dimensions, we are clear on what we measure, so the three dimensions, but also we are clear on what we want to look at the future. And of course, each country has a different pathways. Each country has a different way of going, but there are a lot of opportunity to learn from each other.
So what are the recommendations you would have for India to go about its energy transition planning? What are some of the case studies that you would cite for India then?
Well, first of all, I think India is very strong in terms of the political commitment to an energy transition. It's a very diversified economy, and there is a huge talent pool, right? You have a lot of skills and a lot of bright people. I think that needs to be implemented when we think of the energy transition, to making sure the renewable and what we call the grid edge, the transformation that is happening at the edge of the electricity grid towards demand management, towards electric vehicle, towards, if you like, the electrification of many of the part of the economy, including the industrial, are really thought through. Right? So when you look at the countries, again, the Nordic have been very clear in terms of the electrification of mobility, but even countries like China are really pushing forward on the electrification of mobility. Now, doesn't need to say that every country has to go through electrification, but every country has to have clarity on, for example, having a decarbonized energy mix for mobility, and so on and so forth. So I think, again, is this element of having clear the objective and where we want to go.
Okay, let's get a quick expert view in before we go to the break. Two panelists, we'll first go to Abhijit.
I think in terms of learning from global economies, while there are good learnings, it's important that we customize for India, right? But one learning which we can take from all these people is about technology and big data.
Okay.
I think particularly in mining, the extent of technology usage is really, really minimal. That has to go up. Things like continuous mining, looking at big data. Today 95% of the data, by the way, that is stored today is the data of last 3 years. What are we doing with that data in India?
So use data, use leverage technology.
You can use that to propel our growth, frankly.
Now, we are going to look at the key domestic imperatives when you look at the development of the natural resources sector. And here I want to bring this very important topic of the import bill. Whether we look at the mining sector, whether we look at the oil and gas sector, the import bill is always large, and it's always played a part in kind of dampening that growth effect for the country. So what needs to be done to tackle this? Mr. Chandra, what's your view on this?
First, about the energy policy. To the best of my recall, the Niti Aayog was tasked with preparing one, and we need to hear more about it, and they need to handle all these issues of transit, of affordability, security, and sustainability.
Okay.
Now, to reduce the import bill in the oil sector, I think some of the most significant reforms have been carried out there. And it starts with survey. 50% of the sedimentary basin had not been surveyed. So, the government is funding the survey. Then you have a revenue sharing model. You have open acreage licensing model. You have complete freedom to market oil and gas. These are very significant reforms.
Okay.
But there is a perception that the prospectivity of the Indian sedimentary basins is not very good. So, we have not been able to attract the biggies in the oil sector.
Okay.
Now, we need to change that perspective.
All right, Mr. Jacob.
Well, the import bill where the metallic minerals are concerned, recently actually we've had instances where India has been importing thermal coal. It's been importing even iron ore. In both these minerals actually India has got huge reserves and even more resources. There seems to be some problem in the actual mining process due to either regulation or policy or environmental concerns that is preventing us from using our resources and forcing industry to import instead. Clearly that needs to be tackled. There is another side which is in the case of Goa, which was actually exporting low grade iron ore, and so it's not a case of import reduction but export increase. This low grade iron ore cannot be used in India because our steel mills cannot use below 55% Fe. But because of environmental concerns, the Supreme Court has actually come down very heavily on iron ore mining, and in the case of Goa there were other considerations. So, I think going forward, if we want to use our minerals wisely, we must be very clear and ensure that the environmental concerns are met upfront and neither push to the back on the one hand, nor should we take a shortcut in order to try and extract minerals at the cost of the environment.
Mr. Duggal, your comment on this from an industry perspective.
So, I think if you understand that the finishing plants or the smelting units are not the value addition. So, the real value lies in extracting the natural resources. And if you understand the value which is paid to the miners is about 90% of the value is paid to the miners. So, what we say is that the treatment charges are given to the smelter. It is a job work type of thing. So, the real value lies in what we will extract from the ground. And my own belief is that if we have explored only 10% of our mineral area and 90% still is left, so what can we do? My own belief and self belief is that we have every mineral, every gram of gold is imported. How much of the bill we are a country, we love gold. We are a country, we love silver. So, we use 8,000, 9,000 tons of silver in our country and we produce around 500 tons of silver. So, 7,500 tons of, so like that we do not have the gold, we do not have silver, we do not have copper, we do not have other metals. So, I think the basic need is to open this industry,
up for a better infrastructure to come in play. Fair point. I'm going to quickly shift focus here to the social contract because that's also a very important part of this conversation. Now, what is the remit of the natural resources sector here in India? Last mile inclusion, who will pay for it? Because policy framework as of late has leaned towards massive pressure on the natural resources industry to pay for last mile connectivity. Dr. Ghosh, do you have any view on this? What's your view on this?
Well, like with any other major industry, industry cannot walk away from its responsibility, and the social contract is particularly important because when we see the environmental clearances delays, we see that they're primarily associated with the natural resources industry, and we cannot wish away the problem. At the same time, we have to think about the natural resources that will drive the industries of the future. So, rather than look backwards for just digging up anything from the ground, we have to think, what do we want to make in India? What's going to add maximum value? And therefore, what kind of exploration for those minerals do we need to do? We've identified there are 12 critical minerals that will drive India's industrial growth over the next half century. 7 of those critical minerals, we are completely import dependent. Now, you can't have a social contract that includes jobs that includes, value creation, when you're not looking at the specific areas and the specific industries that will drive that growth. That's the language, that's the message that you got to come to the communities with.
Mr. Vijayakumar, do you think it's time to reimagine sustainability itself, the concept?
Yeah, well, actually the 2008 National Mineral Policy mandated a sustainable development framework for the mineral sector, and that is actually in place. And in 2015, the government actually amended the law and brought the concept of district mineral foundations, and 30% of the royalty amount for mines went into these foundations. There are about 100 of them in 100 districts, and the total amount of revenue annually is about 13,000 crores. So there's a lot of money going to the districts, and it is meant to actually take care of the communities affected by mining, to create infrastructure, to create social infrastructure, to improve the education, health, water supply, livelihoods, all those things. So it's a very good initiative. The problem may well be twofold. One is the capacity to actually absorb and utilize these funds may be lacking, and two, the participation of local communities in planning and executing these programs may be a little deficient.
Okay,
so the potential is there, but the delivery is yet to start.
Okay. Mr. Boka, I believe you have a perspective on this as well. How we can reimagine sustainability. What do you have to say for this from a global perspective for India?
I think these two elements actually connect, this social contract, but also the import bill you were referring earlier. So on the energy side, I think there is an industry that is being created and can be created further. There is the efficiency, so limiting the demand, and that will create jobs, but with different skills. So it's not only the supply side, but it's creating efficiency and optimizing. So it's investing in megawatt instead of megawatt, if you allow me. On the mining side is, again, a bit provocative, but it's the idea of mining above ground, i.e. recycle, reuse, creating an industry there that allow to take out all the used material and refurbish, if you like, or reuse all the material. So that will allow also a reduction in the import bill, but most importantly, a sustainability and a possibility of creating new jobs.
All right. Now, before I come to my last question, Mr. Duggal, could you showcase some of the best practices here which could work from the industry perspective of reimagining sustainability and, of course, the social contract that we were speaking about?
I think there is a stigma attached to the mining, that mining is a pollutant industry. So it is more about doing the responsible mining and showcasing to the world that the mining industry is a socially acceptable industry, and they create the positive impact in the society they work with. So some of the best practices could be that the groundwater, let us suppose, charge goes higher. The other thing is that we create a positive impact on the environment.
Okay.
The third thing, it could be the inclusive growth. Fourth thing could be, that we have, renewable energy attached to this. So the overall framework, if it is maintained in a mining industry, and some of the responsible sectors, they have the moral responsibility to create a model in which the world should look and the common man should look the mining industry with a respect rather than a stigma.
Okay, Abhijit, last question to you. Ease of doing business is, of course, a challenge among all the topics that we have discussed. A quick summary statement, a 10-second statement from you on how this can be solved, especially for the natural resources sector.
I think ease of doing business, we have talked a lot, but I'll actually like to talk a bit more on sustainability, because we always look for government to do more, but there is something that corporations need to do more, and that's sustainability, private sector or public sector. And the reason why I say this is because companies will have to find their own license to operate and not look for others to do that. A very positive example is with the Chhattisgarh sector, the Coal India belt of Gewda, Kusmunda area. After years of mining, the forest cover has actually marginally risen, and they have done a lot to do that. Things like that corporations will have to do to make this more sustainable and propel growth.
All right. On that note, we'll wrap up this curtain raiser for the Global Natural Resources Conclave 2018. I'd like to thank all the panelists here for joining us, and of course, thank you to the viewers for tuning in.